Hey, welcome back to Performance Starts Within. In today's episode, I'm going to talk you through how I've spent over $100,000 on my mindset, what's kind of worked, some of the lessons that I've got from that, the ones that were probably the most transformational in my own personal journey. But before we dive in, quick life update. I wanted to share the story of how we flew across the country with my 3-year-old Archie. And it was in that moment, and why it's so relevant about talking about the mindset today, because it was that moment that I thought that I was nailing solo parenting. I felt like that solo parenting and the mindset work that I've done over the last year was absolutely working whilst on that trip. And it's really interesting that when you're put in moments to test some of the knowledge or test some of the lessons that you've had, that you finally have that realization, that hindsight that it's actually working. And sometimes we don't have that until later. And so last month, flying across the country with my son, I wanted to go attend a business dinner with Jess Williamson's mastermind. And being a solo mum meant that I have to take him when he's not able to go to his dad. And so I decided, instead of kicking a stink about it, I made it into a big trip and booked 2 weeks. And so decided that we'd go and fly over to Perth for the dinner. And also extended for 2 weeks to do some other things and do a bit of a holiday. And I never thought in a million years that I would be traveling across the country, where we flew for almost 10 hours because we had to go from Newcastle to Melbourne to Perth. And he absolutely nailed it as well. He did so well on the plane, to the point that he was really upset that we weren't flying anymore at the end of the day. And I never thought that I would be doing that with a 2-year-old, let alone so far on my own as a solo mum. And it just really shows some of the work that we've done, and also the confidence boost it gave me, the evidence that I could actually do it. And it manifested into lots of other things as well. And so one of the things I wanted to talk about was that it's also in hindsight that we generally see some of the lessons. And when we are placed in moments to be able to see that it's working, that we do find some of those little gold nuggets along the way as well. But let's go back into where I've spent most of the money and also time in the mindset space, and how this might be relevant to you as well. Being that I started my mindset journey from the traditional sense, the psychology sense, from counselors, the ones that we were recommended when we had a problem in potentially 10 years ago, whereas now we're coming into quite a big mindset space in NLP and breathwork and hypno. And so I've done quite an array of different therapies and practices that I'm going to share with you to show you what my personal experience was as a client, as someone that's wanting to heal a couple of things or transform a couple of things, and where this might be relevant to with some of your clients as well, if you're finding that you're attracting maybe people from a traditional sense or a natural sense as well. So 15 years ago, I started my journey in mindset through psychology, and that was just purely out of circumstance because I didn't really know what kind of therapy I needed. It was recommended in the police when you are experiencing certain incidences and traumas that you go see a psychologist that was on the SIRA list, because then it was approved by government in regards to things like injury management and work cover, return to work and stuff like that. And so my journey into psychology was more from a necessity, that it was a referral system. It went through things like Medicare. It had to be on a particular schedule. And because of that, you also got, without judgment, there's some great psychologists out there. One in particular is Kaz, who's been on an episode before. She's amazing. But sometimes you got psychologists that were not necessarily aligned to the goals that you're wanting to have as well. And so the experience that I had in psychology was very much around where it was almost like a checklist. They'd sit there with a clipboard. They'd ask you what your goals are. They'd ask you about the trauma in particular. Mine, for example, was in the police. We had a shooting that we had to go through. And as you can imagine, some of the things that we go through, we don't want to talk about. And so back in the old psychology days, they always wanted to kind of rehash some of the same stories and go through the same problems and retell the same traumas as a way to desensitize you or talk through the emotions or what was going on for you. And often what I found was that I would walk out of some of those sessions feeling probably worse than when I walked in, and I found them extremely unhelpful. It wasn't until I was referred to Kaz, or if you listen to some of my other episodes, I was kind of dropped on her doorstep, where she had a bit of an alternative approach, where she looked at the whole life, but also with the psychology background and the understanding of the brain. She talked a little bit about how it impacted daily life. She did the reframing. She brought in alternative remedies and practices into the psychology elements. And I found her sessions were actually really uplifting and made me feel like I was seen and heard and connected. And I wasn't just forced back into return to work type psychology, which was really, really, really unhelpful for where I was. And so how it kind of evolved from there, planted the seed that there were other ways outside of psychology. But it wasn't really until I met Juliet and Paul, who's been on our podcast, who are NLP practitioner trainers. And I never thought that I would get into what most people describe as woo-woo. But I started to do a little bit of timeline therapy and found that it was starting to not only bring some really good awareness from the subconscious and what was going on, but allowed me to engage in practices like timeline therapy, which allowed me to go back and unpick some old wounds and habits and bits and pieces that were happening beyond. And that kind of expanded into lots of different ways, into hypnotherapy, into breathwork, which is now kind of what I want to talk about as some of the biggest ones that have made the impact. And again, this is just my opinion, my belief on what I find is the most helpful for my personal circumstance was definitely NLP, hypnotherapy, and breathwork. And the reason that they are probably the biggest ones for me is that everything that I had was in my nervous system, deep in my unconscious. I had the awareness that there was something there, but I didn't have that association with my brain and my body to be able to connect to release them. And so part of what I've been working really, really on the last year is making sure that I'm rewiring some of the stories that are deep in my beliefs and also deep in the body so that I can start to let go of some of the physiological impacts or responses that my body has, especially from the police, and also some of the other things that have kind of come up in life as well. And I guess why this is really important and why I wanted to share this is that I've been on a 15-year journey in mindset. And I started from someone that really probably didn't believe in things like hypnotherapy or breath work, all those kind of practices 15 years ago. That was just the phase of life I was in. And it took me a long time to kind of get through the traditional ways of psychology, going through some of those motions before I got to here where I now swear by NLP, hypnotherapy, and breathwork, and I do it religiously with some of my coaches. And not only with flying across the country with my son did I see the impact, I've also seen the impact in business, the way that I show up in my business, the way that I show up now in some of my content, the way that I show up with my friends, with my son. And one in particular moment that I noticed the most is when I first started NLP, I had my biggest month in my creative agency. I hit $20,000 that month in business right after we did some mindset work. The second one was probably only recently, about 3 months ago, I started to do breath work. And I found that I was really struggling with showing up on camera, of moving through some of these emotions with starting new as a solo mom, starting business again, because I'm not a newbie anymore technically, even though it's a new business. And using some of these strategies in hypnotherapy and breath work allowed me to shift through some of the old beliefs of being seen and not good enough so that I was able to then pitch out a new offer in business, and I made $3,000 in the 1 week. So not only is it something that we can't see in regards to our own feel-good mindset, is really good tangible results that some of this mindset work that I've done in hypnotherapy and breath work and NLP has hot on my business. And I think it's really important to remember those moments when talking to some of your clients, that these could be some of the benefits that they will be having in their business as well. So if you are finding that you have a couple of blocks that are preventing you from hitting that revenue, being able to take action how you would like to, or even just getting that stuck in that frozen state. Potentially it's fear or being seen or not being good enough or perfectionism, whatever the stories are. The mindset generally is the reason that we not show up and do those things. And sometimes having somebody that can help us unpack that in a way like NLP or breathwork or hypnotherapy can be super helpful. And it's amazing what you can see happening in your life and your business once you engage in some of those practices. So I'll pop a couple of notes down the bottom for a couple of the recommendations that I have, some of the coaches that I've been seeing that I would absolutely recommend to a T to be able to help you on that journey as well. And if you are needing that support in business and mindset, that's exactly why I have mindset coaches in our coaching containers to support you on the journey, both in strategy and marketing, but also the mindset blocks that might come up along the way. I'll let you know when we are opening doors to our masterminds in the coming weeks. Otherwise, thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you in the next one.